The billionaire returned home smiling for Thanksgiving. But the smile died the moment he saw his sick mother on her knees, eating from the trash like a stray dog. And beside her stood his wife, arms folded, saying, "Finish it. You don't belong inside." When Kofi Mensah turned off the highway and the distant orange of the market lights bled into the high hedges that guarded his estate, everything he had built felt like a stage set, perfect, rehearsed, and oddly hollow. It had been years since he'd walked these gravel paths on foot. He'd been away for business, for meetings under skylight roofs and across oceans. He had ships, factories, and a name that opened doors. Tonight the name felt cumbersome. He was coming home for Thanksgiving in the way people come home to remember what once mattered, hopeful and a little afraid. The estate looked smaller in the dusk, not because it had shrunk, but because the distance made it intimate in a way the glossy photos never captured. Mango trees lined the compound, their leaves whispering in the dry November wind. Somewhere inside, someone had left a lamp on, the kind of light that promises comfort. The servants' quarters hummed faintly, a radio folded into the background like a heartbeat. Kofi felt the familiar tug of relief, that even the rich keep domestic noises, small human things that prove one still belongs to a world. He climbed the driveway, his coat collar up against an evening that had none of the crispness of temperate winters. The wind carried the smell of frying oil and something sweet, perhaps the scent of cassava frying at a neighbor's stall, or maybe just memory trying to be kind. As he walked, he rehearsed what he would say. "Hello, Mother, happy Thanksgiving." He imagined his wife, Ajoa, smiling in a way that greeted his success, not his absence. He imagined dinner prepared with the kind of care that people pay cooks to pretend. He imagined the old laughter, the small, familiar complaints of a family that knows each other too well to be proper. He did not imagine trash. The sight hit him first as a noise, the soft, choking sound of someone retching, of dry coughing that shouldn't belong to his mother's thin frame. Then color. The chipped blue of a plastic crate, the gray smear of refuse, and the sight of his mother, Amma, bent over it. The image lodged itself in his chest like a stone. For a moment, Kofi could not place the scene. He stopped. His shoe scuffed a pebble. He wanted the world to right itself by blinking, to find that his tired eyes were betraying him. But the night was precise and cruel. Amma was small, no taller than the top of his hip. Age had rewired her shoulders into something fragile and bowed. Her hair was a silver halo, cropped tidy, her skin the deep warm color of river mud. Tonight she wore a cardigan too thin for the wind, and a skirt that had once been proper Sunday cotton. Her hands, when she lifted them, trembled like leaves. She pulled at a ragged piece of bread out of the trash and placed it into her mouth with the care of someone holding a consecrated relic. Her lips cracked around it. Her jaw moved slowly, as if each chew was an act of bargaining. Ajoa stood a few feet away, hands dramatically folded, expression blank. She was impeccably dressed in a cream dress that might have cost months of allowance in Kofi's youth. Under the moonlight, the dress looked obscene. Around her wrists glittered a watch, and on one finger the heavy gold wedding band that had once been a promise. She was not touching Amma. She hovered like a judge. In her face Kofi read something he'd never seen before in his wife, a practiced indifference, as if the scene were a small, necessary inconvenience. "Kofi," Ajoa said, as if someone had pressed a button in the dark. It was a simple greeting, neither warm nor cold, but it carried a calibrated politeness that stung. "You're back early." Kofi's mouth was dry. The nearness of Amma, the smell of decay, felt like a breach of etiquette he didn't know how to correct. He put one hand on the fence, gripping it until his knuckles whitened. "What's going on?" Ajoa's smile did not reach her eyes. "You know your mother isn't well. Her cough has been getting worse. I told you we tried to keep things tidy. She has her things. She can sit outside for a bit, get some fresh air. Eat out here." Kofi felt his voice lift. It was too loud. The neighbors were not yet watching, but the compound had ears. "That's not." Amma looked up at the sound. Her eyes, when they found Kofi, shone like glass. There was recognition, then the slow, dawning comprehension that her son stood before her. The lines on her face rearranged into the map of a life remembering its traveler. She involuntarily smiled, the soft, joyless smile of someone who still recognizes the cadence of a loved voice, and she reached a hand out toward him. "Kofi," she rasped, voice dusty as in used rooms. "My son." He bent down without thinking. The gravel bit through leather soles. He took her hand. It was cold and damp with neglect. He expected a woman's bones to be brittle, perhaps, but his mother's fingers were like thin twigs. For a second all the anger and disbelief corked up, replaced by the innate, animal need to protect. "Kofi," she whispered again. "Come home. Sit." He wanted to scoop her into his arms, to carry her into the warm light of the house. He wanted to tell Ajoa that this was unacceptable, that his mother was not a problem to be staged. But Ajoa's face had gone vertical, severe. Her small, neat fists came up, fingers folding. Her voice, when she spoke, was small and precise. "She can't be inside the dining hall like this," Ajoa said. "The staff would judge. The guests, what would they think? You are a man of standing, Kofi. Restraint." The word tasted like marble. For a heartbeat, Kofi's world narrowed to a pinhole. The truth showed itself as slowly as light through curtains. This was not a one-off neglect. This was deliberate, an act performed in front of him. "No," he said, and his voice, steadier now, felt like a weapon. "She is my mother. She is family." Ajoa sighed, the sound like air through money. "Family must understand boundaries, Kofi. You know how people talk. It's Thanksgiving. We have people coming. Your mother has been making noise, coughing and attracting attention. I thought it best she be outside where she could have fresh air and not scare the others." "Scare?" Amma lifted a hand defensively as if she understood the world had spoken ill of her cough. "I did not mean." Kofi felt a pressure building in his chest, a tide of indignation and shame. He had spent years becoming a man who could decide and fix things. Factories to be bought, investments to be trimmed, reputations curated. But he had never negotiated the small mercies his mother required. He had been absent when care had mattered most. Guilt burned inside him, old and familiar and heavy as coal. "Who told you you could treat her like this?" he demanded. "Who gave you the right?" Ajoa's jaw tightened, and for a moment even the watch seemed to tremble with the strain of restraint. "I manage the household," she said, voice flat. "I manage the staff. I do what keeps our home presentable. You are away too often to see it. You make money. I make the house respectable." Kofi had no answer that could bend that sentence to something kind. His mother was the woman who had sewn his shirts by hand, who had saved coins in a biscuit tin, who had taught him to bargain at market stalls. To hear her reduced to a domestic project made his skin prickle. From the corner of his eye he saw the house lights flicker, the servants inside likely whispering, some of them glancing out through lace curtains at the small indignity played out under the mango tree. The world he had paid to build and woodenly adorn looked suddenly like an empty cathedral, with him the only worshipper awake. "Kofi," Amma said, the words small and pleading. "Please. Eat with me." He led her to the stone steps anyway and lifted her onto the stoop. She leaned into him the way children do when they need to be small and safe. Her breath smelled faintly of medicine and a sweetness that told him she had run her tongue over stale bread before placing it in her mouth, the way one does when there is nothing else. He wanted to drag her inside and light a fire under everyone who had let this happen, including himself. He looked at Ajoa. "Bring her some soup. Warm her. Please." Ajoa's expression flickered, a momentary crack of something like contempt and amusement. "Soup? From where? The kitchen is closed for preparations. And besides," she rolled her eyes, "she will soil the floor. The chef is very particular." Kofi's pulse hammered. The logic of the refusal was brittle and practiced. He had seen it at board meetings. the smooth, rationalized cruelty that dressed its decisions in feasibility studies and PowerPoint slides. He knew now that there had been a plan here, to keep the unpleasant parts of life at arm's length. He thought of his childhood in the cramped flat by the river, how Amma had given him half of her yam when he could not afford a proper meal, how she had stood in the rain, umbrella-less, watching him board buses with a knapsack hollowed by ambition, how she had been there when his first company flopped, when no one else would lend a hand. She had carried his failures, folded them, and made them lessons. Now she sat eating bread she retrieved from the refuse as if it were a dignity. "Kofi," she said again, softer, the voice of a woman accustomed to being bargained with. "My child, I forgive. I forgive you always." That line, forgiveness offered when he had not asked for it, broke him in ways the courtroom victories and the banknotes never had. Tears burned his eyes in a way that surprised him. The grief that came then was not only for the sight but for his own complicity, his absence. He had been an absent son, a man whose life had been measured in ledgers and travel itineraries. He had assumed love was eternal, indestructible even as he stamped it with his schedule. "You're staying with me tonight," he said in a voice thinner than he would have liked. Ajoa exhaled, a small allergic sound. "That's impractical. I have guests and plans. You can take her to the guest cottage, or—" "No," he cut her off. "She will stay in the house. No more games." They stood at a curious distance then, as strangers might when they've met at the wrong moment of a wrong story. Ajoa tilted her head as if listening to a conductor. Her posture shifted from cold acceptance to the practiced diplomacy of someone used to persuasion. "Fine," she said, with the lightness of someone who believed she had one anyway. "We will make an exception. But we cannot have her in the dining hall. Your guests are particular. Let the staff know. We'll manage." Kofi wanted to tell her that he would not allow his mother to be an ornament for exceptions. He wanted to tell her that generosity is not a matter of guest lists. But the words that leapt to his tongue were swallowed by a sudden, cold pragmatism. If he and Ajoa turned the compound into a battleground, their small war would be fought with whispers and allies among people who were paid to be neutral. Families are messy, and money taught him the art of choosing which mess to address first. Instead he turned to Amma. "Can you come inside? Just for the night. I will sit with you." She sniffed, as if scrubbed the idea of refusing away. "Yes," she said, but the light in her eyes was complicated. There was relief, yes, but also an awareness that she had been reduced to a choice. She pressed his hand, held on like a child in a storm. "My son." As they crossed the threshold, the ordinary night resumed its small rituals. A young maid looked up and offered a tray of polishing rags with a sort of trained courtesy that carries secrets. The cook's face was a mask of worry. Perhaps she had been told to keep things polished and eyes blind. Someone closed the kitchen door behind them like a judge slamming a book. Inside, the house smelled like lemon and grease and the faint perfume of expensive candles. The dining room was set, a table long enough to swallow arguments and napkins folded like ship's sails. Plates gleamed with the practiced geometry of money. It felt like an exhibit on how the world should present itself. Amma sat in a chair that looked like it had been chosen for someone half her age. She fit into it awkwardly but with the dignity of someone who will not be made small again. Kofi placed his hand on her shoulder, and for a moment he felt the absurdity of the world. Factories humming in distant lands, accounts with 7 figures, and here, a woman eating stale bread because someone in the house decided it was better she be out of sight. He wanted to call people, the ones who made the decisions about staff, the ones who cleaned, the ones who chose what belonged where. He wanted to strip propriety and expose its brittle core. He found himself wanting something else too, something he could not name. There was a flicker of memory, half-remembered fragments from years ago, of his father's voice in the nighttime hush, of a locked drawer, of a photograph with someone else's face scratched out. A quick, shameful thing, like a pulse of suspicion, whispered that there were stories here Ajoa had chosen not to tell him. Perhaps that thought was a betrayal. Perhaps it was nothing. Kofi's life had trained him to read between lines. He swallowed. For now, there was a bowl of soup steaming in his hands, the scent of groundnut and spice promising warmth. Amma closed her fingers around the spoon like a child clinging to a toy. Kofi sat across from her, his mind already arranging battles he had not yet decided to fight. Outside, beyond the windows, the mango leaves tapped the glass like a quiet applause. Inside, the house hummed with 1,000 small polite noises that meant everything and nothing. The problem settled at the center of the table like an uninvited guest. In the quiet, Ajoa walked back to the hallway and paused. She watched Kofi and Amma with a look that suggested she was calculating the cost of every move. For a sliver of a second, her face was unreadable. Not hostile, not tender, but calculating. Then she turned and retreated into the warm glow of the house, leaving the two of them alone like a ship cast adrift. As the spoon moved to Amma's lips, Kofi felt a presence at the edge of his awareness, something beyond the immediate indignation. If this was a test, he thought, then he had been failing it for years. If this was a beginning, then the night would not allow him much rest. The house, with its hidden creaks and cold corners, waited to reveal what it meant to be a family that had learned to keep certain truths tidy. When he looked up, he saw in his mother's face a whisper of something she had withheld. There was a story there, deep as river silt, that she had wrapped in quiet for the sake of other people. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know why she had not said sooner that she was hungry in the way that went beyond food. Hungry for acknowledgement, for belonging. But questions can be weapons. Sometimes the right question is the one you choose to ask later. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the house resumed its civilized performance. A prayer room door creaked shut like a last book on a shelf. Kofi spooned another mouthful of soup into his mother's mouth, and as the steam rose between them, he realized that coming home tonight might be the beginning of a reckoning he had not expected, one that would demand choices not yet decided. He did not know then that the small scene by the mango tree was connected to an old secret, a ledger of favors paid and favors callously collected, an uncle's promise made in the dark, a wilted photograph that smelled faintly of smoke. He could not know that the woman who had made decisions about decor and guest lists had her own reasons, sharpened by a hunger that was not the same as his mother's. For now, there was only the warm bowl, the creak of the chair, and the soft sound of a house pretending everything was as it should be. The moon tilted, a reluctant witness. Somewhere downstairs a radio switched to a distant gospel, and the house inhaled. Kofi would sleep in a room that had his picture on the wall, in sheets someone else had chosen for him. He would wake to a day where invited guests would expect laughter and grace. He promised himself, ask questions. He promised, find out why his mother had been put outside to eat in the dark. What he did not know was that some promises are easy to make and hard to keep, and that once you open the lid on a quiet, careful household, certain things, once revealed, change the shape of everyone inside.